Book of Job under the poetical books of the writings. Remember, we're looking at the last section of Old Testament, which is called the writings. Poetical books, the roll, the historical books. Book of Job. Two views as to authorship, actually three if we consider the critical view. They don't know who wrote it. But Jewish and Christian tradition is Moses or Job himself. I think all the evidence points to Job. It's possible Moses could have recorded the story, but there's no evidence for that. Moses could have gotten the story from word of mouth, you see, in documents and written it. But Job is no doubt the author. When was it written? Three views. Critical view is after the exile. With them, everything's late. The age of Solomon, 971 B.C. E.J. Young, conservative scholar, holds to that. I've never figured out why. There's no evidence for it. Age of Solomon. Well, that wouldn't be written by Moses, but by one of the inspired writers. He holds, of course, the inspiration of Scripture. The third view, traditional view, is that it's written during the patriarchal age before Moses, and that this is the oldest book in the Bible, the book of Job. Dates about 2000 B.C. And I believe that that is the correct view for the following reasons: that it's an ancient book of the patriarchal age. The book does not mention the priesthood, temple, law, which in 42 chapters it would have, since sacrifice is mentioned. No mention of priesthood, temple, the law, and so forth. Secondly, because Job acts as the priest of his house, which is what they did in the patriarchal period up until the time of Moses. The head of the house was the priest, in that he offered all sacrifice, made intercession. You see this in chapter 1, for example, verses 4 and 5. And the sons went and feasted in their houses every day his day, and sent and called for their three sisters to eat and drink with them. It was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning, and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus did Job continually. So he was the priest of his house. Another reason why it's an ancient book, no doubt written by Job in the patriarchal age, the nomadic lifestyle seen in the book. It's not the time of city culture and dwelling in the promised land after the Exodus. Fourthly, you see a tribal family style which existed in the patriarchal period of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The tribal family style. Job is a prince over a tribe of people. Now, the historicity of Job. Is Job a historical character? Well, of course, the critical view in most of your seminary is that Job is a fictitious character, and this is a religious poem on the problem of suffering. Job is said to be a fictitious character, and what we have here is a poem on the problem of suffering. What does suffering mean? What's the meaning of our suffering? But the Bible itself refutes that. Of course, one has to believe the Bible first of all, or he has no basis to believe anything. But the Bible shows that Job is a historical character. For example, Ezekiel 14:14. We have evidence from other books. This is much later than Job. Ezekiel mentions him. God does through the prophet Ezekiel, speaking of the wickedness of Israel and how God has given them up to punishment. He says, these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in the city. They should but deliver their own souls by their righteousness, saith the Lord God. So Daniel, Noah, and Job. That assumes, of course, you accept Noah and Daniel. And even though the seminary I attended did not rule out Noah and Daniel, they ruled out their books as inspired, but they admitted to their historicity, and so if they are historical, the critics are forced to accept Job, but they don't, and so they don't know what to do with passages like that. Very obviously, Job is accepted as historical character by the time of Ezekiel. Then in the New Testament, we have a witness to his historicity. That's James 5, verse 11. You got a witness in both Testaments. I think a Christian could say the matter's settled for me. James 5:11, behold, we count them blessed which endure. You've heard of the endurance of Job and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is pitiful and of tender mercy. Translated here patience, but it should be endurance. In fact, he begins the verse by saying, we count them blessed which endure. And you've heard of the patience of Job? No, it's the same word. You've heard of the endurance of Job. Job wasn't always patient, but he did endure, and that was the test. God would like for you to be patient during your trials. The question is, will you endure through them? You may not always be patient, but he that endureth to the end, the same will be saved, not he that is patient to the end. All right, the nature of the book. The critical view is that it's a religious poem on the problem of suffering, but what we have here is a historical poem based upon actual events. Historical poem based upon actual events. The book consists of a series of dialogues, or debates if you prefer, because sometimes they are debates as you read it. Series of dialogues between Job and his, quote, friends, unquote. You've heard of Job's friends. It's a series of dialogues between Job and his friends concerning the reason for and meaning of his adversities, his trials. And apparently, these dialogues lasted for several months. According to chapter 7, verse 3, Job says, I am made to possess months of emptiness, and wearisome nights are appointed unto me. So chapter 7, he's already talking about it's been months. All he went through, I doubt if it was a week or two. We're talking about the nature of the book. In the book, Job searches for the meaning of his sufferings and adversities. his basic question, and the question of, I suppose, everyone, is why do the righteous suffer? That's the big question of the book. Why do the righteous suffer? We know why the wicked would suffer, but why do the righteous suffer? And Job is searching for the meaning of this throughout the book, and his friends give him all the wrong answers. But he's had sufferings, as you know. Now, of course, as we've said again and again, this is just a survey, and we can only touch on some things. We won't answer all your questions until we study poetical literature as such. Then we study every chapter of the book. But I assume you're familiar with chapters 1 and 2, where Job is said to be a righteous man. Verse 8, the Lord said to Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job? There's none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. Now God calls him perfect and upright, and he suffers all of these adversities. So the question is, why do the righteous suffer? Well, Satan answered the Lord and said, Does Job fear God for naught? He serves you because it pays. Hast not thou made a hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands. His substance is increased in the land. Job was a rich man, just like Abraham, just like the children of Abraham by faith. They believe it. Amen. Put forth now thine hand, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. Now you notice he didn't say he will grow impatient. And God says, well, I don't believe he will grow impatient. People always talk about patience of Job on the basis of King James Version 5:11. That isn't the test. The test is he will reject God, renounce his faith in God. That's the test. And so the Lord said to Satan, Behold, all that he has is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. You notice the Lord limits how far Satan can go against his children. And there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the house of the eldest brother, and there came a messenger unto Job and said, The oxen were plowing and the asses feeding beside them. Sabaeans fell upon them, took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I am escaped alone to tell thee. And while he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, The fire of God is fallen from heaven, and hath burned up the sheep, the servants, and has consumed them. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, The Chaldeans made out 3 bands and fell upon the camels, carried them away. Yea, they've slain the servants with edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Job's saying, how long is this going to go on? And while he was yet speaking. I mean, that's enough to put most Christians into psychiatrist's hands already. Because they go through the simplest little trials, and they'll write me and call, and bless your heart, I'm not complaining. I'm just trying to teach you something. But the simplest little trials, and why? What does this mean? And I claimed my healing 10 days ago and don't feel any better. And how would you like to go through this? And God said he was a righteous man. God said that. You take that by faith on something he said in his word about all who believe in Jesus. He counts you as righteous. You never had God, you don't have a book written about you in the Bible. Now here's a man that God publicly says is righteous, and look what he's going through. So, while he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, Thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their house, and behold, the roof caved in. Killed them all. That's what he says. There came a great wind from the wilderness, smote the 4 corners of the house, and fell upon the young men. They're all dead. I only am escaped to tell thee. Then Job arose and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground and said, Why does this have to happen to me? Well, he did what we're teaching you you're supposed to do by faith. He worshiped. And he said, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, The Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. I've heard professing Christians charging God foolishly. I'll tell you, I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. Well, Job's quite a book that we're not intending to answer all the questions, but we'll give you some understanding, we trust, before we leave it this morning. Job's friends charge him with sin over and over again. Job is saying, as we read chapter after chapter, why? What does this mean? I haven't sinned. I've made sacrifice for my failures. Of course, that's what's implied in the Old Testament. They don't mean they were guiltless. They always followed the commandments and offered sacrifice when they failed, kept them in righteous standing. But chapter 4, his friends are no help. Then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, when Job said, what's this mean? Said, if we ask, say, to commune with thee, wilt thou be grieved? But who can withhold himself from speaking? He says, as he jabbers on, behold, thou hast instructed many, and thou hast strengthened the weak hands. Thy words have upholden him that was falling, and thou hast strengthened the feeble knees. But now it came upon thee, and thou faintest. It toucheth thee, and thou art troubled. He's saying, you've instructed others, counseled them, now it's happened to you, and you're fainting. You're troubled. He's only lost his family, all of his possessions, his servants, his money. And if we read chapter 2, he himself is stricken with a loathsome disease. Said, well, you've helped others. And verse 6, is not this thy fear, thy confidence, thy hope, the uprightness of thy ways? Remember, I pray thee, whoever perished being innocent. You see what he's saying? And where were the righteous cut off? Even as I have seen, they that plow iniquity and sow wickedness reap the same. Well, that's the first speech. He's got 3 friends, and they go through 42 chapters of this. Some comfort. Chapter 8. They're always accusing Job of sin. He says, I've searched my heart. I've been on this ash heap examining my heart. I can't find any place I've missed God. I'm walking in the light I've got. Then answered Bildad the Shuhite, another one of his friends, how long wilt thou speak these things, and how long shall the words of thy mouth be like a strong wind, Job? These are his friends. Does God pervert judgment, or doth the Almighty pervert justice? If thy children have sinned against him, and he has cast them away for their transgressions, in other words, that's why they killed, because they were sinners too. If thou wouldest seek unto God betimes, and make thy supplication to the Almighty, if thou wert pure and upright, surely now he would awake for thee, and make the habitation of thy righteousness prosperous. See, Job's asking God to answer him, to explain it, and there's no answer from heaven. So he's saying, well, if you were righteous, he'd be answering. Chapter 11. Here's another one of his friends. Then answered Zophar, the Naamathite, and said, should not the multitude of thy words be answered, and should a man full of talk be justified? Well, they're really coming against him. Everything Job says, that you're just a big bag of wind. Should thy lies make men hold their peace? And when thou mockest, shall no man make thee ashamed? For thou hast said, my doctrine is pure, and I am clean in thine eyes. But oh, that God would speak and open his lips against thee. Then he'd tell you, Job, how bad you are. Well, Job finally gets enough of that in chapter 12. He says, no doubt, but ye are the people, and wisdom shall die with you. In other words, you're the ones, you're God's spokesman. You've got all the knowledge, you know everything, and when you die, wisdom will die with you, because you've got it all. And he gets a little bit sarcastic with them. Listen to what he says in chapter 16 to his friends. Then Job answered and said, I've heard many such things. Miserable comforters are ye all. Sometimes you're married to them. Sometimes they're in the house with you, the family. You're going through a trial. You know what the Word teaches. You're walking by faith. And everyone's telling you about who they know that died with your symptoms, and that's what you get for going up to that crazy glory barn. So Job says, shall vain words have an end? Or what emboldeth thee, thou answerest? I also could speak as ye do. If your soul were in my soul's stead, I could heap up words against you and shake my head at you. Yeah. You see what they're doing? Yeah. Accusing him. But I would strengthen you with my mouth, and the moving of my lips would assuage your grief. Though I speak, my grief is not assuaged, and though I forbear, what am I eased? It says, if I speak, I'm not helped, and if I don't speak, I'm still not eased. You're no help, Job said. So he protests his innocence throughout. After all, if he's innocent, he has to maintain it, even though it looks as if he's suffering the judgment that everyone knows comes to God's enemies. What's the meaning of trial? Sometimes we don't know the meaning until we read chapter 42 of our experience. See, chapters 1 and 2 were written after 42. I'm not going over there yet. I hear you're turning. I'm just saying we have to come to the end of our experience by faith before we know the meaning. So Job maintained his faith. It didn't say it maintained his patience. Sometimes he got rather impatient, as he couldn't understand anything. And God wasn't answering him, because the test was that he would renounce God, which he never did. What's the teaching of the book? Well, let's summarize. First of all, the book shows we do not always know the meaning of suffering and trials. But the true child of God will maintain his faithfulness in God notwithstanding. Faith doesn't question, it only believes. Immature faith questions. We don't always know the meaning of our trials, but the true child of God will maintain his faith in God regardless. This is what Job does in the midst of all of his grief and trial. Now look, remember what he's going through. You have to keep that in mind. Lost all of his riches. He was a rich man. Lost his servants, except the 4 who gave him the bad news. And his wife, who herself was no help because she said, why don't you curse God and die? That's what Satan said he would do. So she was like Eve listening to the devil in her advice. He's lost everything, lost his children, his sons, his property, servants, lost his health. In the midst of all of that, and then to think 3 friends besides, like he had. Besides all that, he had 3 friends that he said, miserable comforters are ye. But in spite of all that, look at what he says in chapters 14, verses 14 and 15, and in 19, 25 and following. In the midst of all that, he says, if a man die, shall he live again? All the days of my appointed time will I wait till my change come. Thou shalt call, and I will answer thee. He's speaking to God. Thou wilt have a desire for the work of thine hands. So he's confessing his hope that God's going to call him one day and restore him, because God will have a desire for the work of his hands. And in 1925 and following, he shows hope in the resurrection. He may not get his answer in this life, but he has hope in the resurrection. Now, you have to remember, this is the earliest book in the Bible before a lot of deep theological truths were taught, and this is rather profound. I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. How about that? He's coming on the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God. Now that's resurrection. The worms will destroy the body, but he says, in my flesh I'll see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold, and not another, though my reins be consumed within me. Reins stands for his life and strength. He says he'll see his Redeemer standing on the earth, and he'll see him in his flesh, that is, Job's flesh. So though we don't always know the meaning of suffering, this is what faith says. Faith doesn't question, it only believes. If you know your faith's mature when you go through trials, and sometimes you don't know the answer, and finally, after trying everything you know, from praise to rebuke of the devil, nothing is working. You tell the Lord, Lord, your word's true, and you're true to your word. I'm standing here. If it's the last breath I have, I'm healed by Jesus' stripes. Amen. Or whatever the trial may be. It wouldn't have to be healing. Now, if you've never come to that place yet, you will, because everyone has Job's experience to some degree. It may be for you a financial trial, because some people can stand anything but the loss of their material goods, like the rich young ruler. It doesn't always have to be physical. It may be domestic. It may be 1,000 things. But this is the only way faith matures. And God just isn't going to tell you the reason all the time. We preached a sermon here 3 or 4 weeks ago along that line. Secondly, the book is teaching that God's in control of all events. Nothing can touch the believer that God does not permit, and then even then God draws the limits for his children. God is in control. That's seen in chapters 1 and 2 of Job. He told Satan, in every case, you can go so far and no farther. Thirdly, the book is teaching that all things are working toward our ultimate good. Chapter 42 shows that, along with Romans 8:28. All things are working toward our ultimate good. Romans 8:28, chapter 42. Job had everything restored, more than he had before, by his faith and faithfulness. I think you begin to see that Job's just not a hard book to understand, and like Revelation, most people leave Job alone because it's poetic and it's difficult. But if you have someone start explaining what's going on, you can see already, I think a little more clearly, that the book is has a very important place in our theological understanding of God's dealings with man. Let me give you an outline of the book. So as you study it, you can see what's going on. Chapters 1 and 2 is the prologue, written last. It was written after the rest of the book. That is, after the experiences happened anyway. It's the last because it shows the scene in heaven, what took place beforehand, and Job didn't know that until later. Chapters 3 to 31 consists of 3 cycles of speeches. First cycle, chapters 3 to 14. Second cycle of speeches, 15 to 21. Third cycle, 22 to 31. Chapters 32 to 37 are the Elihu speeches, E-L-I-H-U, Elihu speeches. He's a 4th friend. Now the reason those speeches are given separately in the outline, when we study the book, you'll see Elihu makes a lot of sense. He has the right answers, but he doesn't have the complete answer. And God condemns Job's 3 friends, the first 3, and says that Job will pray for you, that you may be forgiven. But God never says anything about Elihu. which means his speeches were theologically sound. He just didn't have the full revelation. And then chapters 38 to 41 is God's reply to Job. That in itself is quite an education. God ends up by saying, I'm God and you're Job. Why do you even raise a question? That's what he says. He says, where were you when I created everything? Answer me. Job ends up, I'm just a worm, I repent in sackcloth and ashes. And chapter 42 is the epilogue. Well, you'll find it's an interesting book when we study it. You'll see where I get the answer to so many people who have problems that I don't know the answers to. And I say faith, in the final analysis, it's Job. Faith won't question, it'll only believe. That's what God told Job. Faith doesn't question, it only believes. And if you don't have that kind of faith, why go to the cross and get that kind? Because people who don't have that kind of faith have no assurance they've been to the cross. They've been to church, they've been to the altar. They've shed a bucket of tears a lot of times, but so did Esau shed tears. Now we come to the what's called the roll. We're looking at the writings, 3 divisions, the poetical books, Psalms, Proverbs, Job. Then the roll, consisting of Song of Solomon, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, and Esther. Now the reason it's called the roll is because these 5 books were on one parchment by themselves, and they were read at certain feasts and holidays. And it was quite handy to have these books on a roll by themselves because they fit certain purposes, like Lamentations, when they would fast over the destruction of Jerusalem, weep and mourn over that. Then Lamentations would be read. Ruth would be read at Pentecost because it's a harvest festival, and Ruth shows the harvest, and so on. What is the first one? Song of Songs, Song of Solomon. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. The title in the Hebrew is the Song of Songs, taken from verse 1. The title in the Hebrew Bible, Song of Songs. Shir HaShirim. First verse gives the title more fully, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. That's why you have the English title up there, Song of Solomon, but they took it from the first verse too. And the first verse seems to indicate that he thought this was the best of his 1,005 that he wrote. Remember 1 Kings 4:32? We told you last time he wrote 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs. This is called the Song of Songs. So apparently he considered this the best. Well, no question about authorship, I would say, from verse 1. The literary form. What is the literary form which will help us interpret the book? There are 3 views. One is this is a drama. The book is a drama to be acted out. Second, view, this is an anthology. An anthology. Now, you know what an anthology is? It's a collection of poems and songs or stories. So this is an anthology of loosely connected love lyrics, usually read at wedding festivities. That's the second view. Loosely connected love lyrics that Israel used during wedding festivities. The conservative, and I believe correct view, is that it's a unified poem. Not a collection, but one. Unified poem. There's absolutely no evidence that it's a drama. You just have to dream that up, that this was written to be acted on a stage, so we can pass over that. Secondly, it's not an anthology, but a unified lyrical poem for several reasons. One is you have identical imagery throughout the poem. See, if it just be a collection of diversified poems on love, why there'd not be connections in all parts of the book. Secondly, the same refrain occurs throughout, connecting the whole together. Like in 2:7, I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the roes and by the hinds of the field, that you stir not up, nor awake my love till he please. 3:5, we see that again. I charge ye, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the roes and by the hinds of the field, that you stir not up, nor awake my love till he please. You see that over in 8:4 again. So the same refrain, at the end of a poem, that refrain will occur. And then a new poem will start. So that ties the book together. And then you have the same persons throughout the book, which shows it's a unified lyrical poem. Well, we've already mentioned the authorship. Solomon says he wrote it, so we'll leave it at that. Views as to interpretation. This is one of the most difficult books to interpret in the Bible. Any commentary you pick up will give you a different interpretation. Some have written whole books on the interpretation. 3 views: literal, allegorical, and figurative. The literal view holds that the poem is a mere representation of human love without any typical reference to a higher spiritual purpose. A mere representation of human love without any typical reference to a higher religious or spiritual purpose. The allegorical view is that of course in an allegory, every detail has significance. That in this poem, every detail has figurative significance and nothing is to be taken literally. And the commentaries abound on what every word and detail in this poem means. There are 2 kinds of allegorical interpretation. The Jewish interpretation, which say that Song of Songs deals with God's relationship, dealings with Israel. And the Christian view would be this portrays Christ's dealings with his church prophetically. Now, if you don't believe me about the variety of confusion, just pick up a commentary and turn to Song of Songs and see what you get. Nothing but confusion. It's popular for a lot of Christians to interpret allegorically, and every little detail has a meaning. That's in Pilgrim's Progress, you know. That's an allegory. Then there is the what I call the historical typical view, sometimes called the typical view, the historical typical view of the book. Third view. See, there were two types of allegorical views, Christian and Jewish. Literal, allegorical, and typical. And the book shows, the purpose of the book is to show that the love between Solomon and his bride, which is the love of a glorious king for a simple maiden, the love of Solomon for his bride, which is the love of a glorious king for a simple maiden, typifies God's relationship to Israel. And prophetically typifies Christ's relation to his church. Now, the book is too difficult to try to understand, so we won't even get into it at all in the survey. I'll just give you an outline. There is a familiar passage, though, in chapter 2 and verse 1, I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valley. So we know who that applies to. I guess we do. I do. Don't we sing in the rose of Sharon? He's the lily of the valley. Well, that's where they get that. The outline of the book, chapter 1 through 2:7. Mutual love. Mutual love. Chapter 1 through 2:7. Second division, the reminiscences. I can pronounce it. Reminiscences. Reminiscences. You know, to reminisce? All right, reminiscences of the bride. Let's see you say it real fast. See, you couldn't. All right, she reminisced. Chapter 2 through 3:5. The wedding procession and the marriage, 3:6 through 5:1. The wedding procession and the marriage, 3:6 through 5:1. Finally, fourth division, separation and reunion, 5:2 through 8:14, through the rest of the book. Not even to try to get into the book, I say, would be a waste of time when you can only survey it. It's a poem, and expressions are used in there that need to be interpreted, and it's highly symbolic, so we'll leave it for study later. And the language is graphic. It talks about literal love between a husband and wife, which causes some to say it's just a poem on human love to be read at weddings, Jewish weddings. But I doubt God would have a book in the Word just talking about physical love. But there are physical expressions in it, and you have to deal with the whole book to do justice to it. And it certainly typifies, I believe, God's relation to Israel and Christ to his church. Did we do Ruth? I believe we did. It goes on the roll. We've already done Ruth. I think we did it in the order it comes in the English Bible, and then I remembered it was on the roll. So you want to put your Ruth notes here. That's the thing to do. Then I won't have to go through Ruth again. But Ruth is on the roll. Okay? Just take your Ruth notes from several months ago when we surveyed the book of Ruth. Put them here. Because we're following the Hebrew arrangement. All right, that brings us, what's the next book on the roll? Lamentations? Yes, Song of Solomon, Ruth, Lamentations. Now that's right after Jeremiah. In the Hebrew, the title of the book is How, taken from the first word, H-O-W, how. You know, Indian. How. It really is. In fact, that word's repeated often at the beginning of chapters, like chapter 2, how. There it is again. I think you see it, verse chapter 4, how. So the name of the book in Hebrew is How. Ekah. English, of course, call it Lamentations on the basis of its contents, because it is a dirge, a lament. And that's where we get the title, from its contents. It's placed, of course, between Jeremiah and Ezekiel in the English version, but it's on the roll in the Hebrew Bible. You look in your Hebrew Bible when you get home, you'll see the 5 books of the roll are together. Ruth's way over in the back of your Hebrew Bible, not way over in the front like it is in English. What's the literary form? The nature of the book, the form. We have 5 poems, each consisting of a chapter. So how many chapters do we have? 5, right. So you're awake. 5 poems, each consisting of a chapter, and all lament the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC. Practically everyone believes Jeremiah wrote it. That's why the English version stuck it right after the book of Jeremiah. Give you an outline of Lamentations. Now, Lamentations is not a difficult book to understand, and so we'll give you a brief outline. Chapter 1 is lamentation over the desolation of Jerusalem. Lamentation over the desolation of Jerusalem. Chapter 1. How doth the city sit solitary? This is after its destruction. How doth the city sit solitary that was full of people? How is she become as a widow? She that was great among the nations, and princess among the provinces. How is she become a tributary? She weepeth sore in the night, and tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers she hath none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They are become her enemies. Judah is gone into captivity because of affliction and because of great servitude. She dwelleth among the heathen. She findeth no rest. All her persecutors overtook her between the straits. So it's a lamentation over Jerusalem's downfall. Chapter 2 is Zion's judgment is from the Lord. Zion's judgment is from the Lord. How hath the Lord covered the daughter of Zion with a cloud in his anger, and cast down from heaven unto the earth the beauty of Israel, and remembered not his footstool in the day of his anger. The Lord has swallowed up all the habitations of Jacob, and hath not pity. He hath thrown down in his wrath the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. He has brought them down to the ground. He hath polluted the kingdom and the princes thereof. Chapter 3, Zion's present distress and future hope. Zion's present distress and future hope, chapter 3. You might want to note chapter 3, verses 22 and 23, and see if you recognize anything. Out of his distress, he said, verse 22, "It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness." That's where the song came from. His compassions fail not. Remember, they're renewed morning by morning. Great is thy faithfulness. From Lamentations. See, page you take the course, that's all you learn. You know somebody didn't really make up that beautiful thought in the song. It came from the Word of God. Chapter 4, lamentation over the sufferings of Jerusalem. Lamentation over Jerusalem's sufferings, chapter 4. Chapter 5, Zion's prayer for mercy.